I'm not very good at writing, so sorry for any mistakes. This story definitely has a lot more details to it, but going into them would make this story quite long and rambly, so I'll try to keep only to the main points. Last summer, extended family and I decided to go on a cruise. It would be my last huge summer vacation before I went to college, so I was quite excited. We had all booked different kinds of rooms, so we were all kind of all over the boat. My room with my parents was one of those cheaper rooms, with just a window at the front of the ship on the 8th floor. All of my other relatives had rooms with balconies on the 10th and 12th floors, around the middle of the ship. This becomes a bit more relevant later on. Anyway, every night the cruise had a theater production put on by the staff, though my family never went because it would be in the evening, and we would want to eat in the dining room instead. That night, the show was murder mystery themed, which somehow made what follows feel less alarming than it actually was. We were eating dinner in the evening as usual, at the ship's restaurant at the back side of the 5th floor. At some point, the captain came on the intercom asking security to come to Deck 7, Room 7712. This isn't the actual room number, but I can't for the life of me remember it. I do remember, though, that it was a room on the 7th floor, near the back of the ship, right above the restaurant. A few seconds later, the captain comes on the intercom again, and I can tell that his voice is somewhat shaky. He requests the medical team to come to 7712 immediately. Most people eating, including us, didn't really think anything of this. Everyone is under the guise of this being a part of the theater production. About 30 minutes later on, the captain came on the intercom one last time. He said there had been some architectural problems on board, and that it was being quickly taken care of. We interpreted this as something along the lines of a door breaking or something like that, and just brushed it off. The next day, we were supposed to have a scenic cruise in the morning and dock around noon, then be able to get off the boat and explore a bit. However, around 5 a.m. the next morning, I woke up almost sick because the boat was going so fast, like it was going to tip over at any moment. It was going way faster than normal, and I didn't understand why. Then the captain gave an announcement. I don't remember it word for word, but I remember her sounding very shaken and almost crying. The message was roughly, "I would like to apologize for waking everyone up so early, but unfortunately I have to announce that a passenger has passed away. Due to this, we are making an immediate stop as opposed to the plan of docking at noon. Thank you." I remember laying there feeling hollow. How the fuck was I supposed to sleep after that? Nevertheless, I somehow fell asleep later on, and woke up at around 9 a.m. We were already docked, but we weren't allowed to get off the boat. The boat was on complete lockdown. No one knew what was really happening, and everyone on board was talking to each other trying to figure it out. To pass the time, I hung out in my relative's room, taking pics from their balcony. In one of the pictures, I happened to capture some of the lower deck balconies. You could see on one of the balcony's walls tiny spots of reddish brown, though at the time I thought these were just rust and didn't think much of it. Time passes, and around 10 a.m. we saw some people exiting the boat. It looked to be about 3 kids, at least that's all I personally saw. They were wearing hoodies and got into a large black tinted van. Also, apparently a large bag was taken off the boat, and then a ton of FBI swarmed on board. We were told no one could get off until everyone at the back rooms of the boat on floors 6, 7, and 8 were questioned. Thankfully that didn't include me, but it was freaky seeing FBI agents walk around at the end of the hall. After 5 hours we could finally get off, and we were greeted by news stations trying to interview us, as well as calls and messages from relatives asking if we were okay. Naturally we were confused, as we had been left in the dock this whole time, but it turns out the lady on board hadn't just died, she had been murdered. After talking to other passengers who actually witnessed what had happened, as well as looking at the news, I finally got a clearer picture as to what had transpired. To paraphrase, the lady who was murdered was on the cruise with her husband and 3 children, who were youngish, around ages 7 to 15. I don't know exactly how old. Apparently, for reasons I still don't understand, the husband killed his wife in their room right in front of the kids. The kids, frightened, ran out of the room screaming for help. Another passenger saw screaming kids covered with blood and ran into their room to find the husband dragging the wife's body towards the balcony. Apparently, he was going to throw her body overboard. The passenger saw this and stopped the husband, and that's when the ship's security took over and we heard those announcements at dinner. So you can probably guess where this was going. Those spots of rust on the balcony weren't rust at all. Yeah, that was blood. And after comparing the location of my relative's room and where 7712 was, it was definitely the blood from the murder. Even eerier is that when I went back to my relative's balcony the next day, I saw that the walls were completely clean, meaning that someone had gone and cleaned the bloody room already. Pretty freaky. It was the fall of 2007, and I was 15 living in New York. I was a competitive athlete in high school, the type who got up before school for workouts and trained for long hours after. With recruiting season about a year away, I was under tremendous pressure to perform in my sport, as well as in the classroom. I was struggling to keep up in calculus at the time, so my mom suggested I get a tutor. She made an appointment with a teacher friend of hers who really knew his stuff. I'd been going to him regularly, probably 3 times a week for a month, before I met Alex. Alex had the tutoring session after mine, and we'd crossed paths every week. It had never been more than a glance and a smile, as I was incredibly shy and terrified of boys. He was tall and blonde with piercing blue eyes, so naturally I thought he was cute. One day my tutor had to change his schedule and decided to book us together as we were learning the same topics in calc. I was shocked and delighted when Alex started chatting with me afterwards and asked for my phone number. I had never had a boy pay attention to me in that way, and I was flattered that someone that cute wanted my number. Eventually, Alex and I began dating. Alex went to a Catholic school in another town, but because he lived in the same town as I did, he took the bus every morning from my school to his. This gave us most mornings together, and he was able to meet all of my friends. I was a little taken aback when they didn't like him as much as I did. They mentioned him seeming weird, and I got super defensive but let it go. I realized I'd been spending less time with them than I normally did, and assumed they were jealous that I had a boyfriend. As time went on, things got more serious. We started experimenting sexually, and eventually I lost my virginity to him in the back of his Ford Escape. That's when things began to change. While Alex and I always talked regularly, he started getting over the top about staying in contact with me. He would make me stay on the phone with him all hours of the night, until eventually my mom started taking my phone before I went to sleep. This relationship also started taking a toll on my athletic career. I was too tired to spend my extra time training, and started skipping my practices to see him, driving 30 minutes each way to his school. Eventually, my friends sat me down and told me how unhealthy this relationship had become. I had isolated myself from them, and my entire free time was spent with him. At this point, I wanted so badly to end the relationship. I had fallen out of love with Alex, and college applications were approaching. I had been scouted by no less than 10 colleges, and my plan was to attend Brown, my dream school. Alex's obsession with our relationship had taken a huge toll on his grades, and Brown just wasn't going to be an option for him. I remember when I told him that was where I was planning on going, and he freaked out, saying he would never get in there and begging me not to go. At the time, I was also recruited by the University of Illinois. Alex applied there, hoping that I would ditch Brown and go to Illinois with him. That was the final straw for me. I ended things for good with Alex, assuming that would be the end of it. Because Alex would take the bus from my school to his every morning, I still had to see him. I remember walking into school past him, and his classmates who took the bus with him, and some of his guy friends yelled slut and whore at me. Apparently, he had spread a rumor that I had cheated on him with a bunch of guys and then ended it with him. I ignored it, until I started getting Facebook messages from random people at his school. I spent months getting nasty messages from guys at his school, accusing me of having STDs and telling me I was going to get gangbanged by his friends. Eventually, I had to delete my Facebook because it just wouldn't stop. I think deleting my Facebook was what set off the stalker tendencies for Alex. He wasn't able to see my face online, so he started calling non-stop and sending desperate AIM messages telling me that he loved me. While this was going on, I was the favorite to win the high school championship in my sport. I'd gone undefeated all season. Alex ended up showing up while I was competing for the championship, and I saw him there. It shook me so badly that I ended up losing the title. I was furious and heartbroken. I ended up picking up his call that came that night and screamed at him, telling him to never contact me again. I got a call a few nights later from Alex. After he texted me, he had something important to tell me. Stupidly, I answered. He began to tell me how he was going to kill me. He was going to show up at my house when my parents were at work with a rope and a knife, and make me suffer like I'd made him. I started to cry, and eventually he went on to say that he was going to get me before I went into school, because he knew exactly where I parked every morning, and that my parents were never going to find me. At this point, I had decided to record what was being said, and had taped it on my phone. I hung up once I felt he'd said enough. The next morning I went into school extra early, much earlier than I figured he'd be there. I showed my advisor the recording, who then called my mom. I remember feeling a deep-rooted shame as my mom listened to the recording, like I had done something to bring this onto myself. My advisor was so alarmed by the recording, he advised me to go immediately to the police. This day still feels surreal to me. My mom and I sat in the police station all day, explaining the story of my relationship with Alex and how it had gotten to this point. The police then drove to his high school and arrested him, while he was still in class. The topper on the day, though, was when I was out to bring food back to the police station for my mom, and I pulled into the station at the same time as the car holding Alex did. I saw him in cuffs, and he indeed had a look that looked like he wanted to kill me. Post-arrest, I got a restraining order against Alex, and he was sent to a mental institution for a while. He ended up breaking the RO on more than one occasion. I contacted the police, but they didn't think it was cause to do anything. I think it's important to note that Alex's family was wealthy and had a name in the area, so it wouldn't have surprised me if that's why they brushed it under the rug. I ended up attending Brown, and had to inform them of the restraining order, and let them know that Alex should not be allowed on campus. It's been over 10 years since this happened, and I still continue to receive friend requests and phone calls from him on occasion. I recently moved across the country from where this occurred. I finally feel safe now that I'm far from where he lives, but anytime I get a blocked call or text from a number I don't know, a thought goes through my head that it's him. It's safe to say that this experience has completely changed who I let into my life, and who I choose to date. I'm still relatively new to Reddit, so I don't really know too much about it. I am a fan of YouTube videos, though. When I'm doing things around the house, I like to listen to readings on YouTube of Reddit stories. both hilarious and terrifying ones. One day as I was cleaning, a video I was listening to finished and automatically played the next one, which was a stalker story reading. After hearing other people's encounters, I decided that maybe I'm ready to share one of mine too. This is an encounter that went on over the span of maybe a month, then continued on from a distance for the next 2 years. It's a pretty long story. Growing up, I lived in a small town. I don't mean footloose small with a mere 14,000 people. I mean really small, with only around 1,000 people when I moved there in the first grade. I didn't make any close friends all throughout my school days, and just wanted to get pretty far away. The farthest my parents would let me go for school, though, was a few states over to study Japanese at a private university in Ohio. My freshman year flew by. I met a ton of new people, and my Facebook exploded with friend requests from both domestic and international students alike. Not remembering everyone I met, I just accepted them all. I was young and excited to make new friends. I did end up making a lot of good friends, too. I was actually kind of, dare I say it, popular. By my second year, the leader of my department had deemed me the big sister of the program. It was a small program, but I was usually the one that people would turn to for help. I was good at what I was studying, and I was proud. There was a building on campus that was open 24 hours for students. It had couches, armchairs, and coffee tables on one half, and tables and regular chairs on the other, separated by a large fireplace. There were also 2 little secluded loft areas for small groups that wanted a little more privacy. People would go there to study or just hang out with friends. There was a cafe attached to it, so it made it ideal for a study spot. Because I'm a coffee fanatic, I was always in the study building where I had access to coffee when I wasn't in class or catching those oh-so-rare hours of sleep. The only problem, well, if you can call it a problem, was that because I was the go-to person for the program, I would only sit down for a few minutes before someone would come up and sit with me, be it to study or chat, usually the latter. When the end of the sophomore year was rolling around, the dreaded exam time was approaching quickly. I was studying abroad my junior year, and wanted to leave my school on a positive note. I was desperately trying to get some studying done, but people kept sitting to chat with me in the study building. Don't get me wrong, I'm not complaining. I really loved my friends, but they couldn't really grasp the concept of silent studying. A few of them were already done with exams and just wanted to talk. I decided to try my luck in the library. Instead of heading to the study building, I went to the library and sat down at one of the little tables by a big window. I was on a roll. I had gotten through quite a few big projects and finished writing one of my presentations. I sat up a little straighter and stretched my arms out in front of me, letting out a satisfied sigh. A voice from behind me suddenly said, "Working hard?" The library wasn't a popular place to study. Everyone usually went to the study building or got private rooms on the other side of the building, so the sudden voice behind me made me jump a bit. Yeah, I replied. He was a Chinese guy on the heavy side, a few inches taller than me. Sorry, do I know you? No, I don't remember his name, so for this story I'll just call him Chen. Yeah, we met at orientation. We're friends on Facebook, he said. His English was good, but sometimes his accent was hard to understand. He didn't give me his name, but he looked at me so expectantly that I felt bad for not remembering him at all. Yeah, I blurted out. It's nice to see you. How are finals going? We talked a little about school and some other small talk. It was getting late, though, so I excused myself to go back to my share house for the evening. The next day, I avoided the study building again, hoping to get the same amount of studying done that I had the day before. I walked quietly into the hall, glancing around. I didn't see Chen, so I went to my table from the day before and sat down. It wasn't 15 minutes before he appeared, though, sitting down next to me and trying to strike up a conversation. I was a little annoyed, but I stayed as polite as possible. I excused myself after about an hour of awkward conversation with the stranger and gave up for the evening. It was early, but I grabbed some friends and we went out for dinner at a local diner. The next day, I decided to try again. I went to the library, and much to my dismay, I saw him sitting at my favorite table. At first, I was a bit annoyed, but then I thought, wait a second, he's here first, so I can just grab a different table and he won't notice. I walked to the other side of the room, passing rows and rows of bookshelves, sitting down at a corner table. If he found me, it would have to have been because he was actively looking. About an hour later, I heard footsteps heading around the quiet room, then a quickened pace heading straight for me. "Hey!" I groaned internally but put on a polite smile. He had brought his stuff with him and sat down across from me. After a painful half hour, I finally gave up and decided to head home. The next day, I decided to talk to the front desk about getting a private room. They were on a different floor, so surely I'd be safe there. Nope, he still found me. After knocking repeatedly on the door and staring at me, I could no longer pretend that I didn't see or hear him, even with my headphones on. If I waited much longer, I'm sure the other people in the area would be just as annoyed as me, and I didn't want to ruin their study time. I opened the door. "Oh, hey, I was actually just getting ready to leave." "So soon? I was hoping you could check my English paper." "Oh, jeez, way to make me feel guilty." Well, I guess I could spare a few." "Cool." He pushed his way in, sitting down at the table. Sighing, I sat back down and took his paper. As I started checking it, he started going on about how he had never shared a meal with a girl before, because he thinks it's such an intimate thing. I was checking his paper as quick as I could, trying to get away from the awkward encounter, so I let out the occasional uh-huh and head nod, barely speaking. Suddenly, he started pulling food out of his bag from a nearby Chinese restaurant and hands me a fork. I'm just sitting there thinking, wait, what? He just said he thinks sharing food with a girl is intimate. Luckily, I was able to form words. "Your paper looks good. I don't see any real English mistakes. I can't stay, though. I had plans to eat dinner with some friends. Sorry." I passed him his paper, stood up, and left. Slightly creeped out. I would have blamed it on cultural differences, but I knew a ton of other Chinese kids on campus, and none of them were as weird as Chen. In fact, I was so close to a lot of the other Chinese kids because they were actually really cool. Chen was giving off some really scary vibes, and I didn't want to see him ever again. The next day I decided it would be better to just study at the study building. I'd rather be surrounded by chatterbox friends than alone with a creepy stranger. The loft was open when I arrived. You have to climb the stairs to get to it, and you can't really tell if anyone is up there, let alone who, unless you're really trying to look up through the cracks or go halfway up the stairs. Practically giddy with joy, I rush up the stairs and settle into the armchair with a cup of coffee from the cafe. The giddiness of finding the loft open quickly wore off, though, as I went into productive mode. I got a lot of studying done, but after about 2 hours, movement downstairs caught my eye. Chen was walking around, looking all around the open floor. I took a deep, quiet breath and tried to push the paranoia down. No big deal, right? Maybe he was just tired of the library and wanted to study in this building for a change. For the first time in 2 years. Then I heard it. Those awful words. He was asking a group of people I knew if they'd seen me, asking about me by my name. Luckily, they arrived after me and hadn't seen me go up into the loft. I was safe. They looked around a little more and finally left. The next day, I promised a Japanese friend of mine that I'd help him with his paper. My Japanese friend was a 6.5 foot tall, ripped like a quarterback phenomenon of a man named Tetsuo. We agreed to meet in the loft at the set time, and I arrived a bit early to make sure that we could actually get the loft, since they were a bit popular. I was sitting in the armchair when I heard him start coming up the stairs. He was 15 minutes early. How very Japanese, I thought jokingly. My heart dropped when I looked up, though. Not Tetsuo. Chen. He silently stalked over to the sofa, dropped his things, and sat on the coffee table in front of me. He put a hand on each of the arms of the chair, locking me in, and proceeded to forcefully kiss me. He was bigger than me in both height and weight, so it took a lot to push him off of me. I'm sure that the rush of adrenaline helped. "What are you doing?" I shrieked. "I'm in love with you. I want to be with you. I want you to marry me and move back to China with me and start a family with me." He started to lean in again. I leaned back, trying to push him away. "Get away from me!" He leaned back a little, but kept his hands on the arms of the chair, and his knees on either side of mine, locking me in so I couldn't get away. What's wrong? What's wrong? Did he really ask me what was wrong? Was he stupid as well as crazy? No, just no. Get away from me. I tried to wriggle free, but he was stronger than me. "I don't even know you." "But I know you," he said. "I need you. I love you." I was about to scream for help when Tetsuo came pounding up the stairs in a rush. Chen may have been bigger than me, but Tetsuo was way bigger than Chen. He looked right at me, asking me in Japanese, "Are you okay?" I replied in Japanese as well, telling him to help me. He started walking towards us, and Chen immediately leaned back and let me go. Tetsuo took my hand, pulling me to sit on the sofa right next to him, saying in English, "You promised to help me with my English paper." I was shaking, but I felt significantly safer with him there to help me. He could easily take down Chen if it came to that. Chen didn't leave, though. He sat in the armchair I had just vacated and waited. Did he think that Tetsuo would just leave and let him continue to harass me? We finished Tetsuo's paper in about an hour. I took my time explaining certain grammar points and spelling patterns, hoping it would take long enough and Chen would lose interest and go away. But he didn't. Tetsuo got up and stood between my stalker and me. "Let's get some dinner." He picked up my stuff, took my hand, and pulled me down the stairs without a second glance at Chen. We didn't get dinner. For obvious reasons, I didn't have an appetite. Tetsuo did walk me home, though, and I told him all about Chen. He said that until finals were over, and until I left the university to go home for the summer, he would act as my bodyguard. He said he would take me to all my classes, and stay with me outside of class. He was true to his word, but Chen was always within view. The day of my last exam, and the day that I was leaving, I met with him in the study building. We looked around and didn't see Chen. With that, I said that I was going to buy a coffee from the cafe. Upon entering the cafe, I rushed to the counter and ordered my usual, a medium black coffee. My blood turned to ice as a voice behind me said, "Make it a large, on me." He was hidden in the cafe, knowing that I would be going there for my coffee like always. "No," I told the woman behind the counter. "My usual medium, please. I'll be paying for it myself, too." There was a little bit of back and forth between us. Thinking that we were a couple or something, the woman behind the counter smiled and said, "Oh, just let the guy get you a cup of coffee." I begrudgingly agreed and rushed away as soon as it was in my hand. He was still paying. He caught up with me before I could reach Tetsuo, though. So close. There was a pillar in the way, so he couldn't see me. Every time I tried to move, Chen stepped into my path and stopped me. He began to beg. Marriage, family, China. No. Tetsuo realized I was taking too long and came to rescue me, telling Chen to stay away from me. As we were walking away, Chen said, "I won't give up. Not ever. Not even if you marry someone else." I took my last exam and moved back to Illinois that evening. I did find Chen on my Facebook and blocked him. It wasn't hard to locate him after he started liking all my photos. I studied abroad in Japan for a year, and had to go back to my uni for my senior year. I had a boyfriend now, who is now my husband. A friend and I rented a house just off campus, but the internet wasn't going to be set up for another few days, so I went to use the free Wi-Fi at the study building. While I was talking to my boyfriend, who was still in Japan, Chan appeared in front of me. He immediately began trying to talk to me, then noticed I was talking on the phone and decided to stand there silently, staring and waiting. My blood ran cold again and I began to panic, telling my boyfriend in Japanese what was happening. I had told him about Chen while we were in Japan. He told me to run away, or to find someone nearby to help me. Instead, the anger in me began to rise. I wasn't some pitiful little girl that needed help whenever something happened. When I was in Japan, I had experiences that demanded I stand up for myself, and this time wasn't any different. I looked at him and said, "I'm talking to my boyfriend. Please leave me alone." He stood there staring at me for what felt like hours, though I'm sure it was only a few minutes. After narrowing his eyes and glaring at my phone, he walked away. I managed to avoid him for most of the year, but I almost always saw him lurking nearby, staring at me. Because I was almost always surrounded by friends, though, he never dared to come near me and beg for marriage again. He tried to approach me more than once when I was alone, but I made it clear to him that I would scream if he touched me. I kept to public places and made sure to never ever be in an empty place. I think it helped that Tetsuo was usually by my side, too. I live in Japan now with my husband. It's been 3 years since I graduated, and I haven't seen or heard from Chan since. I was 21, recently became a police officer, and was also recently dumped, so my friend suggested Tinder. As a 21-year-old and new cop, I had the "I'm invincible and can take on anyone" mentality. I matched with a very good-looking, out-of-my-league female. We chatted and eventually set up a date to meet. She said she had a great open field to look at stars and hang out, and we could meet up at her house. The night came. I was excited, and she seemed to be excited as well when I picked her up. She guided me to the field, and it looked nice. Open space, woods, deer, and other wildlife. In the field, I noticed really dim headlights in the distance. Then, the van started driving towards us and pulled up in front of us, close enough to block me from going forward. I told her to stay in the car and I'd go say hi. I grabbed the flashlight I had in the car and walked up. In the front driver's side of the van, there was a decently sized man. I asked him what was going on and if he could back up his car a little bit. He was very polite and said that he was the owner of the property and that he hadn't meant to scare us. He told me he'd been having trouble with poachers on his property and just wanted to make sure we weren't going to be shooting at anything. I assured him that we only came to look at some stars and wildlife. He was perfectly okay with that, told me to have a nice date, and drove away. After that, the girl was texting non-stop. Around an hour later, I saw headlights coming towards us again, this time at a really fast pace. We hopped in the car, and I moved it into a more defensive position. The same man came close enough to almost hit my car. She hopped out of the car at that point and ran towards the guy. Immediately, I knew I was fucked. I got out and gave them commands to back up and get on the ground. Neither of them complied, obviously. He then proceeded to charge me and knock me to the ground. Luckily, I was able to get him on his back and get up. I saw my date grab a metal pipe from the van. She told me they had a gun, and to give them my money and truck and I wouldn't get hurt. Of course, with my "I'm invincible" mentality, I said no. She started to cry and say that they didn't want to hurt me. They then started to go back towards the car. At that point, I told them that I was a cop, drew my concealed firearm, and to lay on the ground. After a moment of shock from all of us, they complied. I was able to call 911, told them my name and badge number. I had two at gunpoint and needed backup immediately. I gave our dispatcher the best directions I could to this field while on the phone, and they both fled. Again, stupid new cop young guy mentality. I chased after them. I took off after the man who ran into the woods around the field. I chased after him for maybe 30 seconds and heard 3 loud pops and saw a muzzle flash. My I'm invincible mentality went right out the window. I ran like hell back towards my car and peeled the hell out of there. I went back to the area I picked her up in, called dispatch again and had my officers come to that location. Of course, the first officer to pull up was my sergeant and field training officer. Of course, they were both completely understanding, and didn't give me any shit about it at all. The most used words were dumbass and stupid fucking rookie. I hopped in their car and went towards the field. Luckily, the van was still there. I was told to shut my mouth and only come out if they start getting shot at. They found meth right on the center console and searched the car. What scared me the most was when my field training officer and sergeant came back to the patrol car, let me out, and told me to come look in the back of the van. Both of them were pale and looked horrified. I went to check the back of the van, where there were several knives, duct tape, lighter fluid, a decent amount of rifle ammunition, handcuffs, and what looked to be dried blood. In the front seat passenger side, we found an AR-15 style rifle and 2 more handguns. We called immediately for backup and detectives. When they investigated the blood, it turned out it wasn't really blood. The plates had also been stolen, and the van was reported stolen as well. I still get shit about the whole encounter, but luckily no one got hurt. I'll never use online dating again, though, ever.